Hi, welcome to the bathtub. I'm Scott Bradfield, the internationally renowned master bather. I've been master bathing since I was 12 or 13. And this is, there as you can see, there's a lot of things happening here. This is the freshly pressed and from the cleaners shirt edition. I know I pretty much dog it on most of these. This is actually it's pressed. It looks really nice. And there's the picture of the International Bathing Society. You can barely see it next to the Godfather back there, B.K. Smith. But I can't make my thumb go there. There you go. It's up there. And I'm not going to point her out, but Lucky the Wonder Dog is here. She's under my seat. And I'm hoping this broken chair doesn't collapse on her in the course of our talk. And this is the Raymond Chandler approved martini glass out of which I drink a Manhattan. And that's all you need to know. So today is one of those it's a nay and yay edition. And these are sort of, I don't mean to piss people off, but I'm sure they will piss people off. The nay is the stories of Vladimir Nabokov. Vladimir Nabokov. And it's the collected stories, a beautiful looking book with a butterfly on. I got one of the earliest editions of this paperback when it first came out. And a really dense, big, fat book of 600, 700 pages. Pretty small print, and really a great book to have in many ways. And the yay is Nabokov's Quartet. So we're basically doing a kind of the basic gist of this talk is that collected editions of stories sort of suck, usually, for various reasons. Whereas I'm really pushing myself and all my readers really to go back to the original single author collections, the ones that the author put together. Again, some of these were translated. They may have all been translated. I can't remember now, but he did some of his old Russian stories. He translated into English. And they did new stories in English, as you may know, and he selected them for books. And this looks small and doesn't look serious because there's only 140, 130 pages. But I think this is a better reading experience than to read the exact same stories in this big, dense book with really small print. So I'm always saying, let's go back and see it. This has a nice little introduction, a little forward by Nabokov in the year that he published this book, which would be in the 60s, late 60s. And the four stories work together. They just fit together in many ways, and it's a really lovely book to read, as much as any of the Nabokov novels, really. You can just sort of enjoy these four stories together. Try to explain what I mean by that if I can. Now, the other thing to say is that one of the reasons we buy these books, and I'm not going to get rid of this book because it's a great book in many ways because it collects stories that were not in any of the other editions and so forth. It's just I find reading, I tried to read through this book. I know friends who've really enjoyed reading through it. I found it really hard because Nabokov is a very dense writer. His novels are written to be read as novels, but the short stories are even denser. The short stories are much more complicated than novels. I don't know if you know this. If you read a good short story in 15, 20 pages, a lot's happening in that 15 or 20 pages, and you're learning how to read that story. Whereas in a novel, you learn how to read Lolita, and about 20, 30 pages into it, as difficult as it may be, you've learned the basic premise that you need to understand. Whereas a short story, by the time you finish the story, you start the next one, it teaches you how to read another type of story. So I find it really hard to read these sequentially, and I didn't have a good time reading them that way. I originally read all the Nabokov stories in these little collections that I picked up as a young man or a kid, and I enjoyed them more. And going back and reading them again, I enjoy them more now. So the other thing I was going to say is that one of the reasons I buy these things is that when I move it all the time, you see all these damn books, I'm constantly trying to kind of rationalize my book collection. So you see, I would say to myself, and I've done this very often, oh, if I just get this, I get rid of the 5 or 6 collections, look how much more space efficient that is. But now I'm going back and buying back all of these old books because it's just much more pleasant to read that book. Okay, so say a few words about Nabokov's Quartet. And maybe give you an idea of why I like it so much more than reading, the same stories at different places in this big, massive book. First of all, these 4 stories fit together, and Nabokov knows that. They're not sequential stories, they're not interrelated stories, but it's like when a good short story writer puts their collection together, they leave out good stories that just don't fit, or they may be repetitive, or may strike some of the same chords as the other stories. And a good, Nabokov's Quartet has a nice musical completeness to it. And I do love this little collection of stories. My favorite story in it is An Affair of Honor. It's about a character that shows up, it seems to me, very many times in Nabokov. Many of his characters are cuckolds. I can say that, right? Cuckold. I can't say that. Some guy whose wife is sleeping with somebody else. I mean, even Humbert, right? His girlfriend, his Lolita, is running off with another Humbert-like character. And Nabokov is very sympathetic to these guys. He really thinks of them as idiots. And one of the things he doesn't like is they didn't really quite read what was happening around them. Bad readers to Nabokov don't deserve much sympathy, and I kind of sympathize with the character. So this seems a little cruel to me. But Affair of Honor is about a guy he has a friend, and his wife they've got this mutual friend, and he comes home from a trip, and by the time he goes back from the trip that his wife is sleeping with this guy, and he walks into his bedroom, and he finds this guy getting dressed. He's a real creep. And again, the creeps. He's like what's the guy's name in Lolita? The bad guy. Oh hell, I can't remember now. Anyway, the bad guy it's my senior moment. He comes in, and this kind of creepy guy is in there, and his wife shows up, and he gets really angry, throws his wife out, and he challenges this guy to a duel. And the story is like the great Chekhov story, The Duel, about somebody facing the fact that they're going to die in the morning, and they're going up against somebody who's better than they are at everything. In this story, everything. The other character. By the way, we'll definitely do Chekhov in the All Bathtub Hall of Fame. I haven't read the story in a long time, but I think Nabokov even mentions that story. He's doing a little homage to it. It's a great story. Anyway, it goes off. It's a very realistic story from Nabokov. It takes us through this kind of daily, the hourly dreading of this thing in the morning that's going to happen to him. And then he goes to I'm not spoiling it too much. He goes to meet the other guy, and he has the seconds and the pistols and all this stuff. He's going to go into this duel. And as he goes to the duel, he says, "Excuse me, I've got to go to the bathroom." He goes to the toilet and just leaves. He just chickens out and walks away from everything. And he takes us minute by minute as this character walks away from the duel and the kind of blank feelings he has. It's a very realistic sort of story, very much Chekhovian. Then the story kind of veers off into a Nabokovian flight. So his characters often fantasize. The fictions that Nabokov writes for us are often little fantasies that the characters sometimes don't know when they're fantasizing and not. And this character goes off into a little riff, and then we come back to reality. So it's basically a realistic story. And it's a really, really great story from Nabokov. There's a second story called Lick, I pronounced that right, which is about a guy who runs into an old bully from his youth. He's a third-rate actor, and he runs into some old school bully, and the bully remembers life differently than he does. And Nabokov is always interested in people's realities and how they don't quite fit with one another. And he meets this guy, and this guy remembers him as sort of friends, and he remembers him as this really cruel bully. We then have a story called The Vane Sisters. I don't say too much about it, except that it's one of those stories where there's an acrostic hidden away in the last paragraph, which you don't really understand unless you read it a couple of times. And if you didn't really have Nabokov giving you the clue in the introduction. And that's a lot happening in 100 pages. And it's a story about ghosts who can emerge from language and writing and art. And they're coming through and they affect the perceptions of people and how they see things. And the narrator is seeing things in ways that are being affected by these two sisters called the Vane sisters. There's two ways of reading vane. Vane is a weather vane, spectral winds coming through, and also the vanity of these two women who are coming back to life. Finally, there's a story called A Visit to the Museum, where a man goes to see a painting, and it's clear that he kind of goes into the painting, again, from Nabokov art as this kind of region of richness that actually is so, if it's rich enough, is a reality. I think Nabokov actually thinks of it as a real reality if you do it right. And he goes into this painting and kind of out again, and it's only about 10 pages. Now, I just want to say finally, that's a lot of stuff happening. And by the time I finish that, over about 4 baths, because you really read one story. After you read one of these stories, you really can't go on to the next one. It's not like some writers. It kind of steeps. You have to steep in it for a while. And a lot of it you don't quite get. And then you might want to, like with many of Nabokov's books, go back and reread it. But it has an integrity to it. And I've picked up a couple others, Nabokov's dozens, all these books I had when I was younger. And some of the editions that he did of his stories, both Russian translated stories and then new English, written in English stories. And I'm going to start reading those like I would read single author collections to go back to these stories. And again, this is really there to supplement, because there's many stories that aren't included in those collections. But it just doesn't have the pleasure, to me, of this. And that's a lot of book. I mean, I really recommend it. And it's hard it's hard to find this. I had trouble getting it online. I got it online at Amazon or at eBay or something like that. 4 short stories will really kind of give you a great deal of literary pleasure. Okay, that's all I have to say. And Lucky, you want to say goodbye? No, she's dead asleep. Okay, we'll see you soon in the bathtub. Happy bathing.